So, black artists and women artists aren't articulate or intelligent to be considered part of the rock and roll or classic rock zeitgeist. I'm Richard Cole. This is Amari Music Talk. Welcome to this very special episode. So today, what has been going viral has been an interview with Jann Wenner. He used to own Rolling Stone magazine, and he has a book out called The Masters. So this book called The Masters, I guess it's a collection of interviews with, a lot of some of the most respected names in rock and roll. Jann Wenner or Bob Dylan. I think there's also Bono that's part of this as well. But he was giving an interview with the New York Times, and we're going to look at what was said and try to give some context to it. It's unsettling to me, but I'll give my thoughts, after I read a few excerpts from this interview. So again, this is an interview with the New York Times, and here I'll read this section, which says, the Rolling Stone co-founder spoke to the New York Times about his upcoming book, The Masters, which compiles interviews with 7 musicians who are all white men: Bono, Bob Dylan, Jerry Garcia, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, and Pete Townsend. Wenner justified the lack of diversity by arguing that black and female artists just don't articulate at the level of their white male peers. Alright, so in that article, the reporter gives Jann a chance to try to clarify that, help this make some sense. So in the article, the reporter goes, well, wait, stop. You're telling me Joni Mitchell is not articulate enough on an intellectual level? To which Jann responds, well, hold on a second. Well, let's see. And the reporter goes, well, I'll let you rephrase that. He's like, well, all right. It's not that they're not creative geniuses. It's not that they're inarticulate, although go have a deep conversation with Grace Slick or Janis Joplin. Please, be my guest. Joni was not a philosopher of rock and roll. She didn't, in my mind, meet that test. Not by her work, not by other interviews she did. The people I interviewed were the kind of philosophers of rock. Of black artists, Stevie Wonder, genius, right? I suppose when you use a word as broad as masters, the fault is using that word. Maybe Marvin Gaye or Curtis Mayfield? I mean, they just didn't articulate at that level. So the reporter asks, how do you know if you didn't give them a chance? And then Jann responds, because I read interviews with them. I listened to their music. I mean, look at what Pete Townsend was writing about, or Jagger, or any of them. They were deep things about a particular generation, a particular spirit, and a particular attitude about rock and roll. Not that the others weren't, but these were the ones that could really articulate. Okay, so just let me address those two responses. And, granted, I was born in the, what you call mid, late 60s or whatever. But, like I said, coming up in the 70s, 80s, yeah, I've read interviews with some of these folks. I've listened to a lot of the music of a lot of those folks. And just kind of off the top of the dome, I'm going to start with look at what Pete Townsend was writing about, or Jagger, or any of them. Okay, I like The Who. Maybe not as much as Led Zeppelin or the Beatles, but I like their sound. I like some of their songs. Okay, I don't think that they're bad. And to me, Pete Townsend is a really good songwriter. He's really crafted some really great material. And yes, that captured a particular segment of that generation. But you mean to tell me that Curtis Mayfield was around? Curtis Mayfield was doing it long before Pete Townsend had thought of doing it. Pete Townsend, it was a matter of progression. You start with whatever they were doing on their first record. You start with My Generation. That might have been like the first hint of, some major talent. But again, Curtis Mayfield was miles ahead of any of that. To me, and this is also with Bob Dylan, yeah, definitely the voice of a generation. But to me, they're almost kind of neck and neck. They were writing pretty much about the same things in that period, where maybe towards the 70s, Dylan got a little bit more introspective, and really didn't want that title of being the voice of a generation. As his career went on, he was trying to distance himself from that title. He didn't want that pressure put on it. But Curtis Mayfield into the 70s and even beyond, kept that going. And I don't know. I don't know what records this fool was listening to, but you listen to Superfly soundtrack. You listen to a track like, If There's a Hell Below, We're All Gonna Go. It doesn't get any more intellectual than that at all. It's what? Because it doesn't speak to you personally? There's a lot of stuff in the Beatles, because hell, I didn't grow up in Liverpool, but I can understand the type of environment that they grew up in. Trust me, it wasn't until they started playing in Hamburg and started meeting these artist types that really kind of influenced them on how to take their sound to an intellectual level. Just starting with that, and then maybe people they encountered later. But yeah, if you go to that before any of that, you don't get to be that legend. From what I understand, Liverpool can be just as hardcore as anywhere else, any inner city here. So, it's a poor excuse with that. Joni Mitchell has worked with Charles Mingus, one of the most phenomenal jazz musicians, and probably a sound that has influenced, just the essence of civil rights, black power, you name it, just in his sound alone. You know, you don't get to work with people like that if you don't have it. If you don't have it anywhere. And who says this is where the source of intelligence is? But see, that's how left hemisphere thinkers think in that regard. The mind is here. It's here. It's not here. I don't get all this stuff that you see on the TikTok and the YouTube. All the, I don't get all that, but it. it doesn't hold any weight at all. His responses, I mean, kudos for the reporter for calling him out on that, because, well, apparently you did not articulate or intelligently justify your omission of such great artists. In fact, you ask John Lennon, you ask Mick Jagger, you ask Bob Dylan, where their sounds were rooted in folk, blues. It doesn't get any more intelligent than that. And if we're judging intelligence by, oh, just use of the proper Queen's English, just get the hell out of here with that. Because every culture is unique because of those differences. It doesn't make them less intelligent. It doesn't make them less articulate. See, that's that European colonization mess that has created the ripple effect of where we are today with all of that. This is that programming. The programming runs deep. That's where all of that comes from. Because, this whole thing with classic rock and, it's sort of snobbery. Jazz musicians can be the same way, but yeah, you don't have to be technically proficient, I don't think, to create a sound. It's just manipulation of frequencies, sound frequencies. That's all music is. You don't have to be a technical. And who started all that in the first place? Again, left hemisphere thinkers think in that way. Right hemisphere thinkers can utilize the big picture, the 360 degrees of everything. And it's intuitive knowledge, because that's how the cosmos, it works on intuitiveness. So-called intelligence is a totally different thing with that. But yeah, getting to, like I said, this guy, I used to read Rolling Stone magazine, not religiously. If I was at a newsstand and thumbed through a particular article that was interesting, and I'm shocked that the mandate of sort of liberal politics that, well, no, I'm not shocked. Take that back. That, you have that type of a mindset. But then, like I said, when you're trying to save the world, who are you saving the world for? You should be saving the world for everyone. And again, Curtis Mayfield's voice, Marvin Gaye's voice, the What's Going On album. I'll tell you what, go listen to Marvin Gaye's In Our Lifetime album. There's a track, Love Me Now or Love Me Later, which is a literal conversation between God and the devil. How in the hell is that not articulate or intelligent? I bet you dollars for donuts he didn't even listen to that album. It was because probably he was leaving Motown and at the time, and who knows what type of politics between Motown and Rolling Stone or the reporters, or maybe the thing was, oh, well, we got to promote double fantasy more because poor John Lennon, rest in peace, screw Marvin Gaye's album. This is creative genius at that. Like I said, love the Beatles, love John Lennon. Speaking of which, when the Beatles broke up, like I said, this cat was sucking up to John Lennon. So Paul McCartney's first two solo albums, McCartney and then Ram, one of the reviewers of Rolling Stone was going to give those albums a positive review. But Jann, because he wanted to be pro or team John Lennon or kiss up to him or whatever, like he's kissing up to Bono and Jagger and Dylan and Springsteen nowadays, he was trying to kiss up to Lennon first. And to do that, it's like, oh, well, let's trash, no, don't put out a positive review. Trash those two albums, to where only now those two albums are getting the respect that they deserve. Because of, like they're now considered the first indie albums. They're considered the first lo-fi albums. Like McCartney was pioneering that, probably without even knowing it. He was just being McCartney, putting out what he thought was his best work, his good work. And, he's trashing that because, That McCartney was the one that broke up the Beatles. And in that classic John Lennon interview from 1970, I've seen other shows that are done by legitimate, like Beatles fans. There's one in particular, Bottom Line, the host is Michael Nolan, that has really been educational on this Jann Wenner and just how much of a phony this cat is. And, just how much, like the interview with John Lennon. It's, that was done at a point the Beatles just broke up. Everybody's hurt and bitter about that. John was hurt and bitter and going through a bunch of other issues as well. So yeah, Lennon has always been that type of person to speak off the top of the dome. But he's honest enough to always admit when he's wrong, or like, hey, I took stuff too far. I was angry. I didn't mean what I said. But yet, this Jann Wenner holds on to that because I guess that interview, it must have elevated Rolling Stone to this, place of mega respect, because that was like that was breaking news for that time. It was somebody vocally speaking about the breakup of the Beatles. But he's been going back to that one interview every 10 years or so. And like I said, as a Beatles fan too, I read that interview and, read it practically chapter and verse, like it was the Bible too. But as the years go on and as you start peeling back the layers, you understand what the deal was. And this guy has published like 2 or 3 editions of those interviews over the years, just trying to capitalize on that mess too. And like I said, there's tons of interviews that he has done since that 1970 interview that, Lennon has walked those things back. And by the end of his life, he definitely wasn't angry anymore about the Beatles. They put all that behind them. The lawsuits had mostly gotten settled. The partnership dissolved. And, and who knows? They, had John lived, maybe they would have had an opportunity to eventually get back together. They patched that stuff up, and the other 3 knew, like, yeah, that's Lennon. He shoots his mouth off. It's compared to, it's like being Tupac almost. It's like Tupac will say one thing one day and say something else the next day, but it was always heartfelt for that moment. That's all it is, and you just like, that's him. That's who he is. He's just being him. Let it go. Don't take it too seriously. Everything's all right in the world. He's still, creative genius. There you go. There's that. But yeah, I mean, when I talk about Lennon, Marvin Gaye, to me, those are the 2 most blatantly honest songwriters ever, to me. Where they write exactly how they are feeling at that particular moment. And to me, there's no mistaking what's being said. There's no like, well, I don't understand what he's saying. He doesn't appear to be articulate enough to, and there's that word articulate that gets a little, bandied about a little too loosely, when it comes to whatever, people of color. And then even here, even throwing it on women, black and white, throwing it on them like, oh, they're not smart enough. We're in the 21st century now. We're getting deeper into the 20. We're almost at the midway point, practically, if you really look at it. We're 2023 now. And granted, racism isn't going to go away overnight. You're not going to, with civil rights, you're not going to undo several hundred years of ripple effect mess in 50 years or 60 years. We still got a ways to go. And yes, there's been a lot of improvement, but there's still old thinking, and now you got even some of that thinking poisoning the minds of younger people. And again, racism is a poison. And again, this is programming. I see it more so with American listeners than I do, that I see in other countries, where yeah, for a lot of music listeners in other countries, or European countries, Australia, wherever, they can listen to Prince and they can listen to the Rolling Stones and get the same enjoyment. Again, it's manipulation of frequencies. Or, if Prince is singing about God and love or peace and love, or Marvin Gaye singing about God on one album and love and intimacy on the next album. Again, there's plenty of other, white artists the same, but to them it's music. They just enjoy music. And again, you go back to when the Beatles and the Stones were coming over here, as as racist as America was even at that point in the 60s, they were trying to sweet Little Richard and Chuck Berry. And I mean, you want to talk about articulate. Chuck Berry is one of the most important poets in rock music. The I just the intelligence it took to figure out what white kids are thinking and feeling, and to be able to cater the lyrics to that and come up with something like School Days and Roll Over Beethoven. Pat Boone couldn't do that mess. Elvis had to cover that mess. Um, it to say that there's no articulation or intelligence, and then who in the hell are you to define intelligence? What's Jann Wenner? What is his resume? What is his resume? Is this somebody that well, he couldn't make it as a legitimate journalist, but he starts Rolling Stone. But you notice the very first issue of Rolling Stone had who on the cover? Jann Wenner on the cover. And when the world was like didn't get or wasn't even feeling, say, John and Yoko together, there he was. There's Jann Wenner. There he goes. I'm not, hating, like, because if a door closes to you, definitely create your own door. But if you're building your own door, or building your own foundation, or you're creating your own, destiny or whatever, you either go out the hero, or you grow up to be some bitter old dude saying a bunch of nonsense. And this is just it's nonsense, and there's no room for it. Okay, cool. You love John Lennon, you love Bob Dylan, you love Bruce Springsteen, and you want to celebrate them in your book. You could have left it at that. Just come out and just say, hey, these are my favorite artists, and I'm going to celebrate it. Prince is my favorite artist. That's why I do a podcast on it. But at the same time, I also love a lot of other music as well. Like I say, blues, jazz, funk. There's times at night, if I'm not working on a music project or something like that, usually at night, and this is, you want to talk about intelligence again, let's bring Jimi Hendrix into the equation, because I got this idea from Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix used to listen to classical music at night, because the thing is, you at that point, you're trying to rest. You're trying to get your spirit right. You're trying to get your mind right. And you don't need all the noise from the outside world. So he would just play classical music at night. I was like, okay. I start doing the same thing. Like I said, for me personally, if I'm not working on music, because like I said, I kind of like to have that mindset. Like, okay, I'm working on a funk track, so I'm gonna go to sleep and I'm gonna listen to some funk, Rick James, or if it's a Michael Jackson track or a Prince track or something, just to kind of stay motivated, in that area. But when I'm not working on music like that, then yeah, it is more peaceful, because you drown out all this mess that's going on, whether it's reality shows or, you got all this, and plus, folks, since to me 2016 have just gotten angrier and angrier. And then because we have social media really having a foothold on things, and we got these phones now, it's easy to put on TikTok or Facebook all this negative stuff that continues to divide people. Like I said, we still got a ways to go. And, maybe it's still a little bit of responsibility for ourselves. But like I've said on previous shows, racism is a poison. It's a cancer. It's a disease. It basically, one segment that's pissed off. Look, you mad if you're broke? Look, everybody's broke. You can't get mad at this athlete for having this amount of money, but these corporations got even more money. And you're starting to see that show with, the United Auto Workers, the screenwriters, the actors, UPS. You see where people are, getting fed up, because at the end of the day, what we all want to do is just feed our families and try to live our best lives. And yeah, a lot of us are tired of the doors being closed. And I can't stress enough to say, of course, not everybody's cut out to be an owner, but strive to create your own life and control your own life. And like I said, getting mad at this person, or getting mad at this group, that's time taken away from that idea that could bring you, and not just money. Like I said, if you want to live for traveling, or if you just want to live for raising a garden or something like that, or if you just live for feeding people or something like that, your best idea, it won't seep through if you're busy like, oh, I hate this person, I hate that group, I hate this, I hate that. It's like, okay, it's cool not to like stuff, or everything is subjective. Music is subjective, movies are subjective, everything is subjective. What you like, I might not like, and vice versa. So, but instead of focusing on what you hate, what you don't like, let's concentrate on building. And first, build yourself. And then when you're at peace, then like I said, that one idea that can either save yourself or eventually save the world, then, that's the goal to strive for. But like I said, that's all he could have done was just, write his book, go on about his day, and just say like, hey, these are the people I dig. And we would have been all right with that. There would have never been a need for that question. But when you call a book The Masters, and you sort of just say, hey, these are the most intelligent people in rock and roll music, and ignore a big segment of that, it's insane. Until corporations started taking over radio stations and started taking over record companies, did you see a greater divide in that music? Because you look at something like the Big Chill, for instance, about the movie about the people that they used to go to college together, and one of their friends passed away, and they had this big reunion. They're all, whether in their 30s or 40s or something by that point. And, the soundtrack was all Motown. What, Berry Gordy wasn't intelligent to come up with a way to come up with music or styles of music that managed to capture a people. There was no intelligence articulation in that move. Again, I can go with a million different examples, but to me, this was a straight up loser move by a cat that, yeah, okay, fine, you started Rolling Stone magazine, fine, you interviewed one of my favorite artists personally, but from what I've been hearing over the years, like I said, thanks to other podcasts, and from what I've been reading, and especially from this article, you have totally and utterly have lost my respect on that. And this show is going to continue to build artists, whether it's, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, stay tuned. I mean, even when it comes to the quote unquote classic rock, there's going to be an episode coming up focusing on McCartney's Pipes of Peace album as well. And also episodes on there's an episode on a band coming up. I'll save that for when the episode drops. But again, for this stuff being, where our artists are being swept under the rug, or even certain albums, say regardless of who makes them, that are being swept under the rug in favor of this narrative, you know, this show is going to continue. When y'all pumping that stuff out, we're pumping it right back in. So like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and till next time, create your day and create your life. Peace.